Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Andy and Red. Let's take down the house lights and start the show.
Welcome everybody to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Smash Bottle. Play the game Sweeping the Motherland. It's new. You get to break stuff. It's Smash Bottle. Welcome everybody to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I'm Todd.
And this is the podcast where we like to break apart movies as filmmakers and just try to see what they're doing there for the sake of, studying and learning more about filmmaking. And also like some of the writing stuff. I've been doing more and more writing lately. And so it's always fun to see some of the lessons that I can kind of pick up on from a writing standpoint, which there's always stuff that's just tricky to do as a writer, like exposition, where you're trying to give backstory or more depth to a character without making it feel hokey. And there's a lot of films that do such a great job of that. And I don't know, maybe Shawshank did as well. I honestly wasn't paying attention to their exposition, which probably means they were excellent at it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Whenever you know it, whenever you're paying attention to it, it's probably because it's just painful.
And by the way, Shawshank Redemption, that is what we're doing this week. So if you have not seen it, please go pause this episode and watch it. There's going to be tons of spoilers. And for this movie in particular, you absolutely want to make sure that you watch it beforehand, because we can spoil it for sure.
100%.
And that's the thing about spoilers. Spoilers can be more than just, about like what the movie's about. It can, little things like if you know something's going to happen, then the movie's not going to end until that thing happens, things like that. So yeah, it's really important to watch it first.
Nice. Yeah, and we'll talk about a lot of things. Cinematography. I mean, this is, I think, one of the films that made Deakins who he is today. And so can't really talk about Shawshank without touching on cinematography, in which I'll touch on like color, camera work, and some of the lighting, and a little bit of editing. The use of dissolves here I thought was really interesting. And we'll also talk about story and writing, and ultimately, why is Shawshank so rewatchable, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
So synopsis of the film: two imprisoned men bond over a number of years, finding solace and eventual redemption through acts of common decency. Directed by Frank Darabont, screenplay by Frank Darabont, based on the short story by Stephen King, cinematography by Roger Deakins, featuring Tim Robbins as Andy Dufresne, Morgan Freeman as Red, Bob Gunton as Warden Norton, Clancy Brown as Captain Hadley, Gil Bellows as Tommy, and James Whitmore as Brooks Hatlin.
For the second time in my life, I'm guilty of committing a crime. Parole violation. Of course, I doubt they'll toss up any roadblocks for that. Not for an old crook like me. Fort Hancock, Texas, please. I find I'm so excited I can barely sit still or hold a thought in my head. I think it's the excitement only a free man can feel. A free man at the start of a long journey whose conclusion is uncertain. I hope I can make it across the border. I hope to see my friend and shake his hand. I hope the Pacific is as blue as it has been in my dreams. I hope.
Hope. You all right?
There's so many great scenes to pick from, and I was like, what? I just want to hear Morgan Freeman talk about the ocean and hope.
Yeah, I know, right? That's pretty incredible.
How many times do you think you've seen this movie?
A dozen, maybe more.
Holy crap. I think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's this There's something about it, man. I think it's the a little bit of the like it's an insight into a world that most of us don't get to have, the insight into a prison, right? And there's been a lot of movies like that, but I think a couple of things. One, it's a prison, decades ago, right? So it's not like a prison nowadays, which I don't know. I feel like there's this little feeling of it's okay to go there, to that place, to that prison in that time, as opposed to like a prison nowadays. Like if you watch a movie about a prison nowadays, it's like scary. It's hard to go there, but the way they paint this picture, and I don't know what prisons were like in the 40s and 50s and 60s, but it's a place where, I mean, yeah, some bad guys are, I mean, for sure, but like for the most part, most of the violence is done from the guards, and very little from the actual inmates, except for those few guys who, essentially, rape Andy, regularly, but like they don't show it, and they show the actual violence between them, but you don't feel it as much as you would maybe in a place of like today, right? I feel like if this movie was set today in 2020 or 2010 or 2015 or whatever, in a prison now, the cinematography would be different, the story itself would be different, because it might lean heavier on like the action of how bad shit is, but that's not about what the story is about. And it's more about like these two guys being in this place years ago, and I don't know if it's told correctly from the point of view of what it was like to be a prisoner back then, but it's almost not even the point. And so it's just a place where they can't leave, instead of an actual and they're, they have all their rights taken away and stuff like that. It's not pretty, but I don't know, it just doesn't feel as cumbersome and daunting as maybe it would now. Maybe I'm incorrect, or I'm saying this incorrectly, but the other thing is that there is this theme. I'm glad you picked this clip, because there is this theme of hope throughout the whole thing, and I think that you kind of feel that throughout the whole movie. I feel hopeful that Andy and Red are going to get out. I feel hopeful that maybe Andy will they'll figure out, oh, he didn't kill his wife and her lover, maybe, and now he's going to get out. Like there's this hope, even when that hope is taken away and he's thrown in the hole. There's always this, like, I don't know, this feeling of hope, which leads you back to the film, which leads you back to this like, just to have this feeling, even though you go through these hard things and these terrible with them. But and even if they don't, you just love the actor so much, and you love the character so much that you can't help but want to see them again. And when you do, when you rewatch it, it's like visiting an old friend that you haven't seen in forever. And I think part of that obviously is with Morgan Freeman's VO, which is amazing, probably the greatest ever, and that's why everybody makes fun of it. But also Tim Robbins and his delivery as Andy, like this straight flat kind of like character. And then when he comes out of it, you like see him bloom every now and then he goes back to flat again. And usually when he would bloom, it would be when he's helping somebody else, or like when he played the music for everybody, or when he got the beer for everybody, or when he was working on the library for everybody, or all of these things, like kind of like made you love him and hope that he didn't do it. Whether in fact, rewatching it this time, I realized, man, I didn't remember if he actually did it or not. I didn't remember the part with
Tommy.
what's his name? Who came and said, "No, I know the guy who did it. He admitted to me." I didn't remember that part. So when I saw it, I was like, "Oh, that's right. He didn't do it. Oh my gosh." But it almost didn't matter because you loved him either way, and that's almost, a little bit of the point here is that, like, like, people can do bad things. It doesn't mean they're bad people always. Sometimes they're bad people. But one thing I didn't notice, and I'll stop talking here for a second and let you chime in, but and I don't know what prisons were like. Again, let me reiterate, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there were very little people of color in this movie. Very few. I mean, I could count on two hands the number of black people I saw in this film, which is, I don't know if that's accurate. I don't know if that's was a statement, or just not making a statement, not knowing that you needed to make the statement back then when this movie was made. What was it, 99, 2000, something like that?
Shawshank?
Yeah.
It was I think 94 maybe.
Oh, yeah, I'm way off. 94, 93, something like that. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure, but it was, that was the only off-putting thing for me. It was like, is that real? Was that true? I'm not quite sure about that, because obviously if it was told today, it would be very different, a much more colorful film, I'll say that, than when this movie was made. But maybe that's what prisons looked like in the 50s. I'm not sure. That was just an observation that I had that I kind of couldn't get out of my brain for most of the movie.
Yeah, because if you were to juxtapose this against watch this and then watch American History X, those are two radically different experiences, because in this film, race plays almost no part whatsoever, and it's pretty commonly believed, if not true, that race is a pretty large component of your experience in jail. The cliquing and the gangs and affiliation, apparently, I've never been to prison, so I'm speaking only from hearsay. But apparently that's, a lot of the dividing lines. And so for Andy to walk into prison and, just to have this kind of normal experience, his only dividing line is whether or not he's going to give his body over to the sisters. And like you said, a lot of the violence beyond that comes from the guards themselves. And, by extension, the warden. And this seems to be a movie about, to some degree, power and abuse of authority. And yeah, truth and honor, but mostly hope and despair. And that's universal themes, man. I mean, they found a way to be specific about it. And everything you said is funny. Everything you said is in my notes. I'm so...
Oh, I got it, Eddie. Sorry.
No, I mean, that's satisfying, right? To feel like, oh, we're seeing the same thing and we're having the same experience. Yeah, to a degree that you're going to be like, yep, that's what I said. It's perfect.
Well, let's jump into those.
Okay, well, let's start with the cinematography. Right off the bat, you can tell, I mean, it's very muted. The colors are very muted. It's not very vibrant. A lot of blues, a lot of grays. Even in the opening shot before he gets to prison, because those are all very prison elements, right? Dark and lifeless from a color standpoint. But even in the first shot, we open up at night on a cabin, and we kind of recede until we see Andy Dufresne in his car, drinking and contemplating murder with his gun or what have you. But what I love is when, sometimes we talk about the first shot and the last shot. If you juxtapose that against the last shot, where we end in broad daylight on the beach, where Andy's fixing a boat instead of looking at breaking something, he's fixing something that is broken, and he's greeting a friend instead of saying goodbye to his wife. And you also have the vibrant color of the beach and the sky, and it's bright blue, right, in the final shot, and the saturation is back. Life and hope are all kind of returning to the frame after 2+ hours of having it all stripped away. And then even to the point where we pull back in this helicopter shot far enough to where the sky and the ocean almost start to blend together, into this one infinite view of, I don't know, hope. It's beautiful. Just those two opening shots and the closing shots just really scream this whole story of how he goes from the darkest moment of his life to the brightest. And then
is just to add on that, isn't that like a very Roger Deakins thing to do?
Yeah.
You contrast the first and the last shot. I mean, I think that's like anybody who's created anything, what do you start with? What's the first thing people see? What's the last thing they see? What's the first thing they hear? Last thing they hear? Like bookend, things so that it makes it memorable, right?
Absolutely. And the camera work is interesting, and this is one of the things I was telling Todd before we started. Well, let's just talk about the camera work first. There's a lot of long takes, lots of dollying, tilting, tracking, generally just kind of getting the coverage while in movement instead of a lot of hard cuts. Like, we're not going into coverage. We're creating coverage through the camera movement, through the blocking of the scene. In particular, you can look at the scene where Tommy doesn't know that he's got mail, and he gets the mail, and they're all kind of huddled out there with the mail delivery guy, and he's like, "Oh, Andy mailed it in. Like, these are my test results," and they start passing it around. That's a really long one take, and it starts pretty wide, and we kind of hang out and get into these close-ups, and then we kind of start panning or dollying around the group as they're passing it all back and forth. Whenever you think of that scene, it doesn't feel like a oneer. It feels like there's a bunch of coverage and you're cutting in and out. But in reality, he created all that just through the camera movement and blocking. And so watching this movie, I'm in the middle of shooting a scene that has a film, the 30-minute drama that has some elements that are similar. There's certainly jail involved, and there's a lot of passage of time that we're trying to communicate. And what struck me about Shawshank is whenever they're doing that, they generally try to not go into coverage in those moments. It's in the conversations that they usually start going into coverage, but in the storytelling aspect, the montage-y kind of moments that you're carrying from one beat to another, they seem to very often stick in these wide shots and start working out how can we do like a 2-minute oneer, so that you feel like you were really here for a while. And that way, every time you're editing, you're jumping to a whole new place. You're jumping to sometimes a whole new time as the years kind of roll by, and it's kind of refreshing just because if you were to edit and do too much more jumping around within scenes, you can almost start to lose your ability to tell that time is passing. And so by having these longer takes, it makes it a little bit easier, and you don't feel as winded as a viewer having to constantly memorize new geography, new scenes. It gives your mind a break so that whenever you go to a new scene, a new time, it's fresh and you're excited to explore the geography and what's going on in the scene. And so Deakins. Freaking Deakins.
Very Deakins.
There's a lot of, and this is super Deakins, like single source lighting, a lot of soft natural lighting, window lighting, and it makes sense. I mean, you're in a prison in the 40s and 50s. Like, this isn't something that you're just going to have a ton of electricity and a ton of lighting. And so they tend to save a lot of that or we're going to put one single lamp in this prison, in the cell. But overall, everything's really dark, and there's not a lot of internal lighting. There's just that you can feel the prison trying to stamp out the light, trying to stamp out the hope. And that comes through obviously in the psychology of what they're trying to do in those two different positions.
I think it's part of, sorry to interrupt, but yeah. I think it's part of what makes it a little bit more rewatchable, right? Is that this, they don't try to overdo anything. They don't try to oversell the harshness of the prison. They don't try to overact in moments when they shouldn't, like they don't try to oversell camera movements or the lighting, like you just said. It's just, here it is. It's very on point. It's exactly, just kind of like not, they're getting out of their own way, I think, in the filmmaking is what it felt like. And that just makes it more refreshing. I feel like, more acceptable when they're not trying so hard.
I agree. Yeah. And it's nice because even though everything feels bleak, it's still so beautifully lit, that there's this interesting thing that's happening where we can feel the hopelessness, but we can also feel a little bit of life. Like, everyone looks beautiful in this film. The lighting is always really nice, and you want to look at them, you want to spend time with them, despite the situation. And so it's one of those things where that kind of juxtaposition of bleak and hope, bleak and beauty, fits really well, because that's all they're trying to do in prison is, in the terrible circumstances that they're in, or unfortunate circumstances, the non-life affirming circumstances, they're looking for those little rays of sunshine, those little rays of hope that they can create beauty within. And the only way they can do that is through each other. And so it makes sense that all the people would be beautifully lit, because those are the only beautiful things left in prison are the people.
Very well said.
The editing is pretty, I mean, there's not a lot to talk about, but the one thing that I just was fascinated that I had never picked out before, was during that opera scene, whenever Andy locks the door and he starts blaring I have no idea what those two ladies were saying. When we cut to the prison yard, they start dissolving between these shots. And normally, and what I love about this is, normally dissolves are used to show a passage of time, or to connect two scenes together, to emotionally connect them together. Like later in the film, when we dissolve from Brooks's death, right? He's hanging there. We dissolve from that to his letter that Red is reading. And they're just using that dissolve there in order to emotionally connect the two, his death and the letter that he's still holding. But here in the prison yard, they're doing something else. They're making it feel timeless, like time is stopping. And so using the dissolve to cut between, a continuous sequence. These are moments that are all continuous, but they're using that dissolve in order to give it a feeling of timelessness, that the moment itself is standing still. And I don't know that I've seen that before, or at least certainly haven't caught it before. And that was just a new, interesting way that I've never thought of using dissolves before. I like it.
Very cool.
Diving into story and writing, this is going to be a fun one. So for one, I like the opening sequence in court, with flashbacks to the crime. It's very quick storytelling to establish our setting, the stakes, and we're trying to just kind of get to prison as fast as possible. You can feel that we don't want to spend a lot of time not in prison. I think because you also don't want to crush everyone's spirit when you get there. And so the faster you can kind of make everything else, the easier it'll be to accept this new setting and to enjoy it. Instead of setting it up as this thing to dread, then you're there and you're like, I don't want to be here. But the other thing that it does is it opens up a question. That sequence in court opens up the question of, did he do it? Like, we don't really know until later in the film. But what's great about that, opening that question and not answering it right away, is that it puts us, the audience, in the same seat as all his friends in prison. Because we and they don't know if he did it, even though he's saying he's innocent. And of course, they have that great setup. Everyone is innocent in prison, or in Shawshank at least. And what's really good about that whole sequence, that opening court sequence and the flashbacks, is intercutting the infidelity sex scene. Like, it's very passionate. And it helps, along with the voiceover of the prosecutor, right? His closing statements, all kind of combined together to make us feel like, yeah, maybe he did it. And yeah, maybe he was justified. We're starting to take his side, like you just talked about. Like, we're already taking his side and building an emotional case for why he did it and why we're still on his side. That's really fantastic storytelling for sure.
And that's hard to do. I think a lot of that is in the acting, because he's basically on trial and we are the jury. So he's saying he's innocent. But you have the lawyer who's like, yeah, but here's the evidence. And, and when you see him, the camera placement is really important here, because it's from the point of view of the jury whenever you're seeing Andy. the camera's over where the jury is, and then when the lawyer is talking to the jury, he's talking in our direction. He's not looking directly at the camera, and then we pivot 180 to see the jury, but we're from that point of view. So it's like we as the viewer are the jury here, and we need to make our decision essentially. And I think we kind of do. That maybe he is guilty, because then they establish everybody is guilty in Shawshank and they make fun of it. So then you've accepted not only that Andy is guilty, but that Red is guilty, because then they go on to say that Red admits that he was guilty. So now we're believing Andy's guilty. We're believing Red is guilty. We're believing everyone else is guilty because they made fun of the fact that they all say that they're not. So, and we're okay with it, because we love the characters. So then finding out that Andy's not is even more impactful. And then they throw him in the hole for, raising that. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is so wrong. And so we're so on their side. And we even forget the fact that Red is a murderer. We don't care. We don't care because Andy, we love them both, but then we find out Andy was not guilty, and it's just it's like set them all free. It's kind of the feeling that you have, right?
That's right. I love it. I love that whenever he does get to prison, survives the first night, so to speak, and we cut to the next morning. They're eating breakfast, and I forget his name. Is it Hadley? The buddy is like, "Hey, how'd my horse do?" The one who got beat, the big guy. I forgot to put his name in there. I didn't think I would want to reference it.
Yeah.
And I was wrong. But he's like, how'd my horse do last night? The one who got beat up. And he finds out that he died. Like, he got beat up too bad, and there was no doctor in the house. And so he just sat in the infirmary all night and died. And I love that the first thing that Andy says in his time in prison is, what was his name? Like, he's asking about the man who died. And his concern was, does anybody even know anything about this human being?
Yeah.
He's just filled with compassion. Like, that's just who. It doesn't matter if it's appropriate.
It's just who he is.
Andy has no concept, or at least he has no respect for boundaries and what you consider to be societally appropriate or situationally aware. Like, he's just gonna do only what he thinks is right and nothing else. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting in that way. And it's very well revealed, just through that question of what was his name, and everyone's just like, screw off. Like, but there's a lot of great setups and payoffs. One of the things that they do a great job, and I want to say this movie is written in very distinct blocks. Like, we're going to tell this story of the sisters, and they set up the danger of the sisters pretty well, just through that little line in the courtyard. Like, I guess it wouldn't help to tell them that I'm not homosexual, and he's like, they're not either. That you'd have to be human first.
So well written there.
Yeah, and it's great because it sets up a battle in prison for him to overcome, and it does it in a way that you wouldn't anticipate. So he loses his first fight, right, and that sets up the dangers of prison in general. And this whole scenario itself feels like an obvious question in the viewer's mind, right? The idea of, is he going to be raped in prison? Don't guys get raped in prison? And from what I've read statistically, that's the most rape in America happens in prison. And so they address it. They address this idea of rape in prison. And it gives us a reason right off the back to sympathize with Andy. And it also sets up Andy's hero moment, because he can't overpower the sisters, but he has other heroic skills. And Andy, and this is it reveals his whole mentality and how he's going to spend his time in prison. Because Andy wants to use his mind, his skills, to feel normal. This is, of course, revealed when he wants to get beer for his friends, right? He doesn't even drink it. It was never the point. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to feel... because I don't think he's an alcoholic, but maybe that moment was enough for him. Like, I ruined my life drinking. It almost doesn't matter if he's alcoholic or if that was even an acknowledged thing back in that day.
I don't. Yeah, I think he just saying he quit drinking. It was never, he didn't ever want the beer. The point was to like, he had a long-term vision, right? It was a long-term play. Get on the side of the guards and get on the side of the other inmates, right? But also help them at the same time.
Yeah, I don't know how deliberate it was, but it was certainly like, what's great about it is it's an unobvious solution to what was an impossible problem, right? He was never going to make it in prison on his own. And that moment just became this opportunity to do a favor for a guard, or more importantly, to do two things that made him feel normal. One, to do legal stuff, to exercise his knowledge as a banker and as a financial genius, and then also to provide something to his buddies. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, it was just this amazing, whether it was super intentional beforehand, which I can't imagine him predicting that, but he certainly knew how to use it to his advantage in multiple ways. And I think the most important one was just to feel like a human being for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the most important thing, but he is a foresight guy. I mean, was this before or after he asked for the rock hammer?
That was after. Yeah.
After.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at the end when they do the whole flashback thing to the first time he's carving his name in the wall and the rock falls out, and then I feel like most of this entire movie is him planning how to get to that point, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. No, there's definitely something to that. He knows to be on the lookout for any opportunities to help someone or to indebt people. That's something that's pretty well acknowledged in prison, is the whole debtor system of, I did you a favor, now you owe me. And so I'm sure that was still a factor back in those days. To have people owing you something was a good thing, good place to be. But also on that roof, I love the crane shot, the whole movement of the crane whenever Andy's being rushed over to the edge, like he's about to be thrown over, and we cut to this top-down crane shot of him kind of teetering on the edge, and it really ramps up the stakes and the danger of it. And they maneuver that crane down so that eventually the danger kind of goes away as he's getting the situation under control. Like, it's really beautifully orchestrated to reflect the scene. But I love, and this is going to take a slightly askew here for a second, but so he fast forward, right? He starts writing the letters, and he gets his library started, and they're unboxing all the books, and they're looking at Treasure Island and Alexander Dumas. And I realized for the first time in that book that they were looking at is The Count of Monte Cristo. And it's perfect. This movie is a modern day Monte Cristo. A guy wrongly convicted and patiently plots his escape, and there's revenge and there's treasure. It's perfect. This is just a modern retelling of Monte Cristo, and it's absolutely wonderful. I also wonder if the Randall Stevens, his fake identity, is like some light reference to Treasure Island, Robert Louis Stevenson. I have no idea. But it feels like just
I could see that
tangentially kind of in there.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
But another cool section with, I would say I'm labeling this under writing because it's kind of built into the story and into the editing, is his reveal for when he escapes the prison. I love, we establish everyone's getting out and Red is worried, and so there's this fear that Andy's killed himself. And the jail cell opens, he doesn't step out, the guard comes down and he's threatening him, like, if you don't step out here, you're going to ruin my day and I'm going to ruin yours, kind of thing. And we see him enter from the perspective of the jail cell looking out, and we see his eyes wide, oh my God. But we don't cut to what he's looking at. Instead, we cut to the warden opening the shoebox and revealing that Andy's dirty shoes are in there. And it's kind of confusing the first time you watch it. You're like, wait, what is this? And you see the confusion on the warden's face too. And we're all kind of confused as we're like, wait, oh, those aren't the shoes. He spent all night polishing the shoes. Okay, those aren't the ones. And I love that reveal for a number of reasons. For one, obviously they're kind of telling you that Andy had a plan, like you were saying, like there was a plan, and the plan is now being executed. But there's also just this other little subtle jab, which is to say that the shoe is on the other foot. Like there's just kind of this visual play on words. And of course, the other play on words is whenever he goes in there, he opens up the Bible and he sees that he bookmarked it at Exodus. Which is
perfect.
Yeah, which is in the Bible is when they escape Egypt and they're on their way out, Moses and whatnot. And so, yeah, this kind of carries us into why it's so rewatchable. And I would say at least half of these you've already touched on, if not all of them. And I will expound. For one, I think it's rewatchable because it's a period piece. It's kind of a romantic era, right? We're in this unexplored space within that era. And so this all kind of combines to make it timeless. You have this time period and this environment to explore that feels fresh and brand new, while at the same time having this element of timelessness to it. Because prison culture in a pre-modern era is a little fascinating. Like, what was it like back then? And of course, before this movie, my only vision of this era in prisons was inmates breaking rocks, like whatever that accomplished. And so this added a whole new layer of paint for me. But they're also exploring these universal ideas of despair and hope, right? The triumph of will and justice overcoming injustice. The underdog is victorious over the corrupt man. And so that's always super satisfying. Same reasons why 1,000 other movies are, fun to watch, Rocky or what have you. All sports movies, basically. The other thing is the fellowship, right? We get to see these friendships develop and we spend decades with them. We feel like we're in the crew, and seeing Andy go from outsider to legend is so subtly cathartic. Like that's just a really fun character arc. But there's also mystery. Like there's this element of mystery of, did he kill his wife? How did he escape? And so we're constantly seeing these clever twists of brilliance between the prison break and even just revealing how we know that he's innocent and how we solve that question. Because it feels like at a certain point, you're just not going to get that answer. You're just going to have to take his word for it. And no one wants to do that. That's not very satisfying. And it's understated. This is what you were saying earlier, and this is my word for it. It's very understated. Like we fill in all the emotions here. It's so well written and acted that we imagine that what they must be feeling without ever emotionally draining us. It's an effortless drama with a lot of stakes and a lot of payoffs, but it's not overtly tense. And so we get to the end of this and we feel refreshed. We don't feel like we've been through the ringer, even though we've seen a man, lose 30 years in prison or 19 years in prison. Like in most movies, that's going to take a lot out of you, and that's not going to be something you want to re-explore. But I love that.
Now, to add real quick, do you think that the fact that it is over a certain, like such a long period of time is possibly why? Because, if a movie is over like the span of like, I don't know, a week, right? You're packing, just the emotional like weight of, man, this character is going through all of this in a week, like is pretty intense. But if you're like breaking it up over years and then you see this like gigantic evolution of him from, timid, quiet guy to, like you said, legend at the end, maybe it's more of a journey you can go with him on instead of like trying to hold back. I don't know.
I think the way that they executed it, because the other way to execute this is it would compound the stress. The longer you're seeing someone unjustly and they're not dealing with it well and they have no hope, and there's a lot of yelling. I haven't watched Hurricane in a while, but I think the Hurricane would probably be an example of that, of watching an unjust man trying his best to kind of deal with the fallout. There's other movies for sure. You just start to feel like this is unbearable. Like this guy does not deserve. Instead, they explore the other side of the coin, where you get to see him kind of not quite embrace it, but make the best of it. Right? He's polishing rocks. He's building a chess set. He's building friendships and a library. And so you feel like even though he's trapped in this place, he's building something. And we like to see people, create out of nothing, even more so. It's in a sense, it's very godlike. Like it's kind of amazing. One of the other aspects that and this goes right back to what you were saying, like friends reuniting. Like they leave the story unfinished for us to imagine. It leaves us wanting more. So we rewatch it to indulge in Red and Andy's friendship. Like it feels like, yeah, I am kind of reopening my I don't know. I'm zooming with my friends right now through the TV. Like, yeah, it totally feels like an indulgence. Like, you know how it ends. You know that he's not innocent after, if you've watched it in the last 5 years. But it still feels okay. It's like, man, it's low stress. Friendships are great. The performances are great. And you want to imagine and try to build that imagination of what happens next. Yeah.
Yeah, like how does he do this? How does he, and I think if he would have been boisterous and like this, kind of loud character, it would have been way different. But because Andy is like this
so even
quiet storm, he's this quiet storm, man. Like, and finding out that the whole damn thing was a plan from the very almost the very first day. It was like, oh, I think he got there in 47, and then in 49. He asked Red for the rock hammer, I believe. It was like one of the first things he said to him, but it was like 2 years later or something like that. So from then all on, like at least from that point on, maybe even before, he just had this plan, but I guess it was when
he would have had to wait until he had the rock hammer.
He had the rock hammer.
Yeah.
From the moment he got that rock hammer on, everything was planned. Well, almost everything except for like probably getting thrown in the hole for 2 months. I mean, I can't even imagine that. And then to see it come to fruition in such a badass way, where he wins without even being there. When the warden kills himself, and when the what's his name?
Captain.
The Captain Hadley
Yeah.
Cries, like getting arrested. Like he wins without even just
with his mind.
Will you add this to your outgoing mail? Like, and that's how he wins, And then he goes and he sands a boat on the beach, and it's just incredible. It's just such a great win. And where not all movies like this should end in a win. I don't think that they, I think this is definitely an example of something that is a great because it does, and some other movies are not great because they do. I think you just have to tell your right story, whatever that might be. And in this one, you just love the character so much, especially Andy, because he loves other people. Like everything he does, I mean, obviously he's working towards his own goal, but in the middle of it, he's like, how can I help these guys? How can I help I mean, it's not necessarily that he's excited to help all of the guards, do their taxes, but at the same time, it, like you said, makes him feel alive. Like he's using his skills. So he's getting something from that, but he's also does feel good about helping. Like that's what actually is his strength inside, is the ability to be selfless in the middle of this place where everyone is selfish. It's such a great story in that regard. It just makes you like want to be that way yourself. And maybe that's why you want to watch it, just to feel good, even though there's terrible things happen in it. It still is like this whole like man, life throws some shit at you. How are you going to respond? Kind of thing. Yeah. It's great.
It's amazing. It's Stephen King, man. It's always surprising to me that he is he's so well known for his horror films, and yet his best products are his dramas.
Yeah. I mean, great point.
It's incredible. Like Stand By Me was a huge childhood film for me, and it's Stephen King. Like it's just a drama with kids, and freaking Stephen King, man. Green Mile, he's incredible. Cool.
Yeah, and to think, like, I talk to my wife about him all the time, and he is like a good shining example of a writer who is rejected so much. I think he said there's a story of like he used to take all of his rejections, because back then, there was no internet, right? So you get letters, and he used to take all his rejections, and there was a nail above his doorway where he would go to write, and he would put them all up on this nail. And at one point, there were so many rejections, he couldn't fit it on the nail anymore, but he just kept going, and now he's Stephen King, one of the greatest writers of all time. And it's just a testament to, if you love what you do, then do what you love. And, if you're good enough and you work hard enough and you improve, there's nothing that says that you can't, be great. It's just it's so awesome. And he's brilliant. And and this movie is a great example of that. You're right. It's awesome.
So freaking good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's all I had.
Okay.
You got it? Yeah, you got anything else?
No, just that I just love this film so much. I could do it again tomorrow. I could do another episode tomorrow. But it's definitely one of my favorite Tim Robbins performances. And maybe one of my favorite Morgan Freeman performances, just because I feel like he just plays himself in every movie that he's in. He's just like, it's Morgan Freeman. And he's like, I don't want to say he's one-dimensional, because he's freaking incredible. But it's just, people write characters for him rather than write a character and fit him to it, because he's just Morgan Freeman. Yeah. But he is enough of Red in these little moments that I feel like I see a little bit of something extra in this from him, rather than just delivering lines. Like the moments he gets angry, there's one moment where he's talking to Andy sitting at the lunch table. I think it might be right after Andy got beat up or something, or like back from the hospital or whatever, the hole,
maybe.
No, when he got hurt. So when he got beat up.
Oh, the last time the sisters got him.
Yeah, and then he said something about hope. Yeah. Andy did, and then Red was like, "You listen here about hope," like he was giving Andy. Yeah, he was giving Andy what for about hope, and that's such an interesting scene to me, because that's somebody who's been in jail almost his whole life, 30 something years. And so he has an outlook on hope, which is there is none. Talking to someone who just refuses to give that up. But he is adamant that there is none. And his delivery of that is like really, really on point, and just incredible Morgan Freeman that you don't get in a lot of other movies that he does. And then, just, it's a good time to watch this kind of thing with all the stuff that's going on around the country. We see this kind of stuff in you and I, we see this kind of stuff in films. And so many people actually experience this kind of stuff. And so it was just like an interesting reminder that even, this story that was filmed and told in 1994, about prisons in 1949, how much has changed?
Right.
Really, it's like, if you give someone a badge and a gun, or you give someone a uniform, it doesn't matter if it's with a badge or a gun. It's that. You give somebody a uniform, they walk taller, they stand prouder, but they might also feel like they have a little bit more edge on somebody else. Who knows? And it was a little timely for me to watch it, and a little bit disheartening in a way, but there's hope. There's always hope.
Yeah, and I like what you said too about Morgan Freeman, because whenever I think of Shawshank, I recognize that it's Morgan Freeman, but at the same time I'm thinking that's Red. Like his performance is so true and so spot on, and everything plays so well that I really do see Red and Andy. Like it's not something that I feel he's bigger than the role at that point. Whereas now a lot of his other roles, and a lot of people who take on roles, it takes me like 10 or 15 minutes to settle in, like, oh yeah, that's not Tom Cruise, that's Ethan Hunt or whatever. Like I have no problem settling right in with Red and Andy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fantastic.
So great.
What are you going to recommend this week?
Oh yeah, so I'm going to stay on the Stephen King train, and I'm going to recommend The Green Mile.
I started watching that last night.
No, you didn't.
Yeah.
Was that going to be your reco?
No, not at all.
Oh, you're like scrambling to find the other. No, yeah, that's yeah, it's just another great, jail film or storybook novel, by the same writer, but a completely different story. But there are similar aspects to that story as to this one as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
I originally had the perfect recommendation, and I never wrote it down, and it's fled my mind. So instead of whatever that was going to be, I'm going to recommend Portrait of a Lady on Fire. It's streaming right now on Hulu, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's forbidden love, and I've been aching to see, like, I've been such a big fan of these films telling the LGBTQ stories, like Moonlight and Call Me by Your Name, and I just hadn't really found one for women that I really loved yet. And Portrait of a Lady on Fire was finally just fit the bill. It leaves you just feeling all kinds of ways, and so check it out. We'll put both of those trailers in the show notes. And stay tuned for next week. It's going to be a heavy week next week. We're going to tackle the documentary on Netflix, 13th, by Ava DuVernay. So go watch that and tune in. We're going to have a lot of heavy discussion. It'll be interesting and hopefully informative, and we're going to have a lot of surprises that I think you will appreciate and add to the conversation that's going on in the country right now. Don't forget to subscribe, review us on iTunes, leave us a note if there's something you'd like us to talk about, or a film or a TV show or whatever that you want us to cover, or things that you find interesting. Like, hey, y'all never talk about set design. Why don't y'all freaking do that? We can certainly do that. If you want to comment on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/The Shawshank Redemption.
And we'll leave you with a quote of the day from Nelson Mandela. I always love the quotes you pull, man. So good. So good. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. So on point for this film, so on point for life. And what a great man. A great quote from a great man. Just unbelievable.
100%. I have nothing to add.
There's nothing to add to that. I'm trying to think. I do this meditation every day, and this morning it was interesting. It was like talking about searching for happiness and chasing happiness and what that feels like, and it always feels like you can't quite catch it. But the moment that you stop thinking about your own and you start thinking about other people's, it just finds you, So it's just like, it's on point for this quote, on point for, I feel like today, for this movie, for everything, man. Fantastic. I should read that every single morning. I feel like,
yeah.
I'm gonna copy and paste it in a little Post-it. Have it right here on my desktop.
Good use of it.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining. I had a great time talking about. What do you write? I mean, what do you put it at? What's your?
Oh, this is super easy. I mean, I don't know if we can go to 11, but it's an easy 10.
Easy 10. Same here. Okay, had to do that. Okay.
Nice.
Thanks for joining us again. Join us next week. We're going to be doing 13th. Really, really excited about that. So take some time, watch that. It's on Netflix. It's free. And yeah. Until then, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.